Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 3 of the June STC Roundtable. Today's panel discussion, TechCom Teams and Collaboration, is presented by Toni, Paul Perrotta, Kim Mazur, and Kathryn Showers. Toni, I will now turn it over to you.
Great. Good morning or evening or afternoon for our listeners who may be across the globe. Thanks for joining us for week 3. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a little context for anyone who hasn't been participating in the roundtable this month. Our theme this month has been leadership and teams, and we've been conceiving both of those terms pretty broadly. So leadership, not just about roles of titles or roles or position, but how anyone from individual contributor to manager to VP can exhibit leadership. And teams also conceive broadly. So that might mean an organizational structure. It might mean a ad hoc task force that's spun up to do a project, or it might even mean a two-person collaboration. So in week 1, we had a webinar where we talked about how we can use teams to maximize our impact, either as organizations or as individuals. In week 2, we published an article that talks about strengths-based leadership and ways for us to identify what our leadership traits are and how to amplify those. And so there are a bunch of resources, a bunch of links for some assessment tools that we can use to understand our own strengths and think about how to leverage them, and also understand the strengths of others and how we can modulate our own behavior to collaborate more effectively with other people. Today we have a panel. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And then next week, we have something a little different in that I interviewed one of my colleagues here at ServiceNow to talk about how her side job, which is as a co-owner and player on a semi-professional women's tackle football team, inform her approach to leadership as a TechCom manager and vice versa. So we recorded that yesterday. It was super fun. So we'll post that next week and hope you'll take a listen to that as well. But turning to the topics for today, well, first, a little information about me. I work at ServiceNow. Before I was at ServiceNow, I was at ADP for a long time, so I'm getting a chance to reconnect with one of my longtime colleagues there as part of the panel today. There is some contact information. This deck will be posted if you want to follow up afterwards and continue the conversation. But today's conversation is going to be kind of a free-ranging conversation. I've asked 3 of my favorite people who have had leadership positions in TechCom for some time and have talked about and thought about this topic to share their perspectives. And we're going to start with some general areas of conversation, but we're also just going to see where the conversation goes. So without further ado, I want to go into a little bit of a deeper introduction of our panel, and I'm going to let folks introduce themselves and talk to us a little bit about what they're doing right now, but also what leadership roles and types of teams they've worked with before. So Kim, could you start us off?
Yeah, I'm happy to, and thank you for having me here today. I'm thrilled to be here. So I worked for ADP for many years, so many years I can't even count that high, and I led a department of 60, and over the course of my career there, I had the opportunity to work on many teams, and I started to think about it in preparation for this discussion, and it occurs to me I've been on a staggering number of teams, and I bet you all have as well, although you may not realize it, right? Unless you're in business for yourself, or you work in a company that doesn't care what you do and you just sit there by yourself doing whatever you like and get paid for it. And by the way, if you have that job, let me know. I'd like to apply. You're on a team, right? You're on a project team. I've been on project teams. I've led, led a whole department, led my management team. I've been on the teams that my bosses had, their leadership teams. I've been on cross-functional ad hoc teams. I've been the named leader of teams. I've emerged as leader of teams where I was not the named leader. And Lord knows I've been named a leader on a team and somebody else actually in point of fact, led it. So it's all around us, and I can't wait till we dive into the discussion.
Great, thanks, Kim. And just for the record, Kim's coming to us from the east coast of the U.S. and the west coast of Canada. Sorry, Canada. I have the World Cup on my mind this morning, and Canada's playing the west coast of Florida. So,
Yeah.
So moving on, the rest of us are in California today. So, Paul.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to speak here. My name is Paul Perrotta. I started out in 1985, if you can count back that far, as a junior technical writer for a high-tech firm in Silicon Valley, where I worked all my career. I've only changed jobs maybe 4 times on purpose, but I've worked for 8 or 9 different companies through the magic of corporate acquisitions and takeovers. In the 2000s, I worked at Cisco as a senior manager leading a large technical communications group. We had about 85 people spread across San Jose, 2 or 3 cities in the US. We had people in Europe, in Israel, and India. And in my last job, I was a senior director in an information experience organization at Juniper Networks. So in my role there, I led a team providing common services like editing and illustration and project management and so on for the rest of the org. I also served as a chief of staff for the VP of that organization, and I ran operations for the entire organization. So I kind of had my fingers in a lot of different things, and whether I knew it or not, I was there to form opinions, to fix problems, to make certain we could move forward. I'm currently retired, and I live in Rancho Mirage, which is about 100 miles east of Los Angeles in a part of the Mojave Desert.
Paul has, just for the record, Paul has an interesting approach to retirement. I think he keeps he's trying to perfect it. So
I'm not very good at it.
Successful and has tried a few times, and even now.
This is the second retirement, and this one might stick, but you never know.
Yeah, he's also, clearly keeping a hand in. He's a regular at conferences and likes to share his knowledge and stay involved in what's going on. So glad to have you here today, Paul. Thanks for taking a pause in your retirement to.
Yes.
And then, so Kathryn and I are the folks who have day jobs in tech comm management right now, and we're both coming from from San Diego today, but from different corners. So, Kathryn, tell us about your journey.
Well, hello there. My journey, I adopted DITA in 2006, and I've been an advocate for DITA ever since. I'm on my 3rd company for transcreating content from whatever its source is into a structured DITA content or deliverable. This year has been amazing, and I have an amazing team who has just gone above and beyond. And sometimes I wonder, how do I do that? How do I engage my team so that they are so enthused and excited? I don't even have to ask them to do something. They just do it on their own. And I can say, I'm not sure how that happens, but I am awfully glad that it is. In addition to working in tech comm and being a manager of the Information Development Services team here at PlayStation, I'm a word nerd. I'm an advocate. I advocate for inclusivity and for gender identification. In addition to that, I am a proud mom of a trans teen whose pronouns are he, him, his, and himself.
Great. I'm so thrilled to have everyone, but part of the reason I wanted Kathryn here is both because she talked about the mystery of why her team's so excellent, and some of it might be a mystery and some of it isn't, right? Some of it is about good leadership, right? I think I first came across Kathryn and became friends with her after hearing a presentation she did about communications across her team and using portals to do that. And so it's not quite so much as a mystery as you think, probably, Kathryn, but and then also because it is Pride Month, right? And so I know a lot of organizations have issues of diversity, inclusion, and belonging front and center these days, and especially this month. And Kathryn's got a real passion around that, and so I was interested in getting her perspective, as both somebody who's passionate about that, has personal connection to it, but also is in a leadership role to talk about, what we can do as leaders in our organizations to make diversity and inclusion and belonging real things. And so anyway, looking forward to the conversations. So let's go ahead and jump in. What we're going to do today is, again, we really want to keep this a conversational panel. So but we did want to have a little bit of structure as well. And so we're going to start with kind of a round robin where we're going to have kind of a rotating facilitators, and we're going to tackle 4 really broad categories and have each of our panelists lead the discussion on these first key areas of servant leadership and leadership in technical communication, by which I mean, what's unique, what are some of the unique challenges that we deal with as leaders in the technical communication space in our organizations and our companies. And then we'll talk about diversity and how we foster it, how it impacts teams. We'll talk a little bit about really drilling down on what everybody can do in terms of leadership, and how if we're leaders who have positions of authority, how we can foster leadership among individual contributors, and if we're individual contributors, how we can be mindful of our own leadership potential and develop that. And then as we have time, we'll move on to some other topics that come up or that strike us based on where the conversation goes, or that might come up in the questions. So I encourage people to pose questions, and I'll be keeping an eye on that as we go along. And if there are some that are particularly relevant to the section we're in, we'll try to tackle them as we go. And then we'll also have some time at the end to just see where the conversation leads us. So without further ado, we're going to move on to the first section, which is servant leadership. And Kim's going to lead us in this section of the journey.
Thanks, Toni. So I decided I would look up what servant leadership is according to the experts, because I have my own definition of it, right? And I thought, it would be smart to come in with a prepared definition. So I Google it, I click on it, and the first thing I come to, it says, a servant leader, I am not making this up, a servant leader just pretty much lets their employees do what they want and cares about the employee but not about the work. A regular leader cares about the business and getting the work done. Okay, so we're not doing that anymore. Forget Google. But let me start by telling you a little bit about how I came to my whole philosophy about servant leadership. So when I was at ADP, for 9 years, I led the team. And they were an amazing leadership team that I had. The numbers of direct reports I had fluctuated between 6, 7, 8, 9 in that area. And Toni, in fact, was on that team for most of those 9 years. And one of the things that made the team really special and very effective in my eyes was how different everyone was. And each person brought a unique skill set and a unique perspective and unique insights into their role. And I thought of myself as a conductor of a wonderful orchestra. And, my job was to help them be successful and make the total output, be the very best that it could be. And that was the greatest thing about the role. Servant leadership is about influence. It's not about power. It's about building consensus. It's about seeing opportunity and potential in others and helping them achieve it. And that was such a good thing. I loved that I didn't need to know everything. I didn't need to do everything. I just needed to see potential and nurture it. And yes, I agree. Good leaders set direction. They have to do that. But they let the people on the team build the roads to get there. And they remove obstacles. Good leader removes obstacles on the road to getting there. So that's my little metaphor. And the great thing about servant leadership is you don't have to be in a position of power or authority to exhibit servant leadership. if you volunteer to take an extra assignment, if you help a colleague solve a problem, if you see something, a better way, a better idea, and you verbalize it and you go work on it, that's servant leadership. And, that's probably, my one takeaway in thinking about all of this is that no matter what your role is on a team, you can be a servant leader. You don't have to be in charge. All you have to do is be a great team player, look for opportunity, and go capitalize on it. And I think that particularly in the field of technical communications, that way of leading, that way of being on a team is particularly appropriate because we have thinking jobs, right? We're not working on an assembly line. We're not building something rote. We are, by the nature of what we do, collaborating, innovating, developing, creating, dealing with new priorities, dealing with all these things that come up, all of which provide great opportunity. And I don't know how anyone else on the panel feels about how servant leadership relates to the TechComm field, but I think it has a strong place.
So, I find that really interesting because I had never heard that term until just a couple of days ago. So I too went and read a few things about it to understand what it was. And it's very, very, it describes what I think are successful leadership teams and successful leaders, whether they're named leaders or not, in the various roles that I've seen and have been in. Tech Docs folks, I call them Tech Docs. I know we're supposed to say technical communicators, but Tech Docs is what I grew up with. So Tech Docs folks have a reputation for being a little introverted, for being a little shy, perhaps not the person who's going to step forward first and lead the charge to organize a party for, birthdays that month, or maybe to go figure out what tools they're going to use or anything like that. They're going to be a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more reserved. And the idea of this idea of servant leadership creates a space that says everyone can participate according to their gifts and what they need to do at the time. And I like that because it lets people participate in ways that they might want to, rather than in ways that are prescribed to them by a title or by a role. So if you're the team leader, but you are empowering your folks to do stuff so that they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting and you're not doing every single thing as the team leader, I would say that you probably have more engagement on your team than you would if you were a command and control kind of person who's doing it like you were in the military.
Exactly.
Hey, Kathryn, you might need to turn off your mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, I would agree with all that you said, and I would also state that it's very important to lead by example. Show your staff, show your team, show the people who look up to you or value your knowledge and expertise in an area that you can deliver, and you can deliver excellent products. And once you do that, people come to you, you become a leader. So I think one of my personal successes is leading by example. And I certainly wouldn't give any of my staff or my kids or any of the ERGs that I'm a part of, the employee resource groups, wouldn't give them a job that I wouldn't be willing to do myself.
I've often told people on my teams, how about I'll suggest someone, hey, Janice, can you take this on? Because I know she can do it, or I think or she's never done something like that. And there's always a little bit of pushback, and they say, well, you're the team leader, you should do it. And I tell them, yeah, but I already know how. I don't need to learn this again. I want you to learn it so that if I'm not here next time, you can do it. Show me what you can do. Does that feel comfortable? And a lot of times people are really surprised that if I, as the named leader in that role, don't want the glory and the credit and the, that's not how I'm motivated. So that doesn't matter to me. What I want is for my team to succeed, and I want to get something done on time, under budget. But I want it to be the right kind of experience for all the people involved. And if that means someone maybe doesn't know what to do up front, I'm there to help. I would make that happen. I make that available to people because that's how you grow. That's how you learn those things. And sometimes you figure out you're not a good leader. And a named leader, how many people do you know of in your career who were terrible, terrible leaders, and they should never have had that title? I can think of half a dozen right off the top of my head. I don't want to be around those folks. I would rather help other people learn what it is they need to learn to be more successful, whether it's through influence or through direct accountability.
I think that's a really great point. I think sometimes as a leader, the more you give away, the more you keep. I've known people who they don't want to share their secrets. They want the credit. And it comes, I think, from a place of fear more than anything else, right? Lack of confidence and fear. And once you realize that if you succeed, I succeed, and I don't need to get the credit. It'll come back to me in its own way, maybe not right away, but the more open you are, the more you release, the more you allow the people around you to be successful, the more you are going to bubble up as that leader. You think about it, most people don't start their careers out as leaders. Maybe if you're a graduate of an MBA program and you get some special whatever. Most of us just start out as individual contributors. How do we become leaders? Some of us get promoted because our technical skills are really good. And I think those may be the people who might fall into the bucket, Paul, that you were describing. The ones that aren't so good, they're so good at their job, they must be good as a leader. That only makes sense. The most technically adept, the smartest, the highest producing must be the best one, but we know that that's not really the case.
It's almost never the case. It's really inversely related, and to promote people because they're technically good is, I think, really dangerous ground. And I think you can end up really damaging a team by telling someone, yeah, you're really good at this, you're my best writer, or you understand this more than anyone. Why don't you go lead a team and watch it crash and burn unless you're there to pick up the pieces? And you don't do that lightly. You have to be there to help that person, coach that person, figure out how to do stuff. Because I think most people think that being a leader is telling people what to do, and that couldn't be further from the truth. It is about we used to say in the 70s and 80s, you should bend like the reed in the river. As a leader, you get to bend a lot. You're just constantly being hit by different forces, some of which you share with your team, but some of which you don't. And you're supposed to say, I know where we're going despite rising waters or despite these heavy winds. And people who are new don't have that. They don't understand it. And I think it is a real problem for the rest of the organization when we promote the wrong people based solely on technical acumen and not on people skills or any kind of experience leading teams or even a desire to lead a team. Sometimes people just get asked because they're there. They've been there the longest. And wow, that's not the right way to go, in my opinion.
No,
I think
I agree with you.
One of the things I've been seeing in organizations that might help with some of that is I see more organizations creating more tracks for advancement, right? So this was certainly true at ADP. That there was a point in a job family at which it would split, and you had the opportunity to go into management, more leadership, or technical. And I think sometimes part of why what you're describing, Paul, happens is because there aren't those opportunities, right? And people want to advance. The only place to advance is supposedly into one of those roles, but we're doing this at ServiceNow too. We're creating opportunities, to get higher IC level positions that don't require a, people leadership role, that are able to celebrate that technical acumen and expertise and allow for continued growth and recognition of it without kind of creating this unhappy marriage for some people, with people leadership. So I just want to comment real quickly on the idea of servant leadership as well, because, when I hear the term, when I first started hearing the term, I asked, in service to what, right? And I think that helps me get clarity about what it means, right? Because we take the term leadership and it can mean a lot of different things. Sometimes it means to lead the way, to blaze a trail, to be on the cutting edge. We actually had a bit of ambiguity about the term this morning when we were preparing for this panel. And that's the type of leadership, right? It's about moving the work forward and advancing a cause or a project. But there's also the idea of leading people, right? Having followers, right? And those are different things. And I think right now, with the servant leadership and some of these other things, Kim, you mentioned the idea of that part of why people don't do servant leadership is a fear, right, about losing control or kind of, it might even be a version of imposter syndrome, right? Like not feeling like a leader if you're not, like if I'm not in control and knowing everything, then why am I a leader, right? So maybe that's part of it. And I think that's why we're seeing so much literature and buzz around things like empathy right now, the importance of empathy and vulnerability, right? The whole Brene Brown fan club, right? Because that really does help us be better leaders, because to me, servant leadership is about being in service to the people we lead, right? And so that helps me kind of make sense of that term. It doesn't mean that we don't still, help make decisions and help lead the work forward and make connections. To me, that's one of the biggest things that leaders do, is make connections, right? They've got a vantage and they can make connections and find places where there are people with different skills who can chime in and make connections between different teams and help foster collaborations and remove obstacles. But really, it should be in service not just to the work, but also to the people, the rest of the team or the organization.
I agree, actually. I think there's a lot that goes on there. And people become leaders for different reasons, and you run into people who are not very good leaders. Sometimes they're just assholes. Sometimes they really are terrible people, and you don't want to work with them. My God, I don't know why we find that so interesting and we keep them around. We should get rid of them. They don't even belong on a team or in your org. If, in my opinion, I get rid of those people. I just don't want them there. I would much rather have people who want to be there and who are participating and want to contribute. If you're just there to show up and you kind of, and you're just kind of a jerk, well, boy, you got to have a high output.
In my experience, people can get away with being jerks if they bring other unique skills to the job, right? Something there is of more value to the company than, that excuses awful behavior. And that's unfortunate.
Sometimes you have to live with that. I can remember working with a wonderful manager, a peer manager, who had one of those people on her team, and she put his desk 3 floors above everybody else's, and he wasn't allowed to come to team meetings because he was so abrasive and difficult, but he had the one skill that could get them through what they needed to do. And what a shame. And then no one would tell him that. I did when he came to interview for my org. Do you know nobody likes working with you? Why would I bring you to my team? I'm really blunt about stuff like that.
How'd that go over?
He didn't want to join my team after a while. I'm like, great, I don't. So yeah, win-win, you know?
Yeah.
So let's pivot a little bit and into the second section.
Okay.
Awesome conversation, but we want to keep our progress going here as well. And it could be a slight pivot. It's up to Paul. We're moving into, and we've already touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to make sure that we didn't stay in the abstract or the general level about leadership in across all disciplines, and talk a little bit more specifically about some of the unique, challenges or tendencies or behaviors that we see around leadership in a tech comm environment. So Paul, take it away.
Okay, two things. I have two stories, one's short, one's long. The short story is I was promoted to lead a team that I was already a part of. And the only reason I threw my hat in the ring was because the other people being considered were terrible people already. They didn't understand what they were doing. And I just thought, I can't possibly work for these people. And I don't want to leave the company. I'll throw my hat in the ring. And my boss at the time said, I've been wondering when you were going to come in and tell me you wanted the job. It's yours. And well, this isn't right. And then I learned what it's like to be the manager of a team that you're in. And I learned all the terrible things about my coworkers that I never wanted to know. And it was a learning experience like no other. That was a very small team. We had maybe 30 people in the entire department. Another one, though, that I want to talk about, I had been with a new company about a month, and we had about 150 or 160 people in the organization. The company was divided into different business units, and every business unit had a tech doc team associated with it, a director, a few managers, and a few people reporting to them. And those teams could be as small as 5 people, or they could be as big as 25 or 30. And there were several of them. I had been there maybe a month, and the company had just announced that the quarter was going to be challenging and costs were going to be contained, meaning, be careful of what you spend. So the very next day after that announcement, one of the tech comm line managers, her name, we'll call her Sue, that's not her real name, dragged me into an escalation with the VP of an engineering organization that she supported. And there was a new product that was being developed, and they had a tight schedule, and Sue decided that her team couldn't do it. Sue had 8 people on her team, and she was asking for 9 more so that she could do that one project. So I agreed to attend the escalation, because what do I know? I've only been there a month, I don't know anybody, and I go, and I'm going to be her support. So I was a director, Sue was a manager, and I got my ass handed to me on a plate by the VP in that room. For those who don't know, VPs cannot talk very directly with individual contributors. It's very bad form, and you end up in HR anyway, but they can talk pretty clearly to directors. And he pulled me back and had another meeting with me to tell me in no uncertain terms he thought our team was incompetent. How dare we ask for resources the day after the company just announced belt tightening? Why is it every product we put out there needs more people? Why can't you figure this out? So I met with Sue, and not only did she not know that the company had just said we're going to have a tight quarter, because she didn't read those things, she had misunderstood the product and its timeline and the planning around it, and she hadn't asked for help from other people in our organization of over 150 people, writers, editors, illustrators, project managers. And her resource planning exercise was more a swag than a technique. It's not like she wrote anything down. She would just say, well, that sounds like 2 people. And if I add up all these things, I come up with 9. And the project was only 10 months long. So onboarding and training 10 new employees, I don't know about you, but bringing 10 new people into an organization in 10 months is really hard to do. And I think that's a tall order. So externally, the engineering organization saw them as a roadblock. From a corporate perspective, they weren't engaged. They didn't understand what the company's goals were and what the company was telling the outside world and its own people. From an internal perspective, they were disassociated from all the other people in the organization. And that was a real problem. It's part of the problem that I was brought in to help organize. So we had to start from the ground up, and it formed the basis for an exercise that went on afterwards, which was you get all the senior leaders, mostly directors, in a room, and you agree on common goals and objectives. And they had never done that, ever. So they were using the same tools, but they didn't have the same approach. They didn't estimate the same. They didn't use the same output types. So some people were doing all of one thing, others were doing PDFs and HTML. And they didn't talk to one another to say, oh, I've already got people who have done that before. My person was in your group. Why don't you take this person for 3 months if I can get someone maybe in the future from your team, because I have this thing, I know it's on my roadmap. None of that discussion was happening. And that's kind of the model of a mature organization, and the model of mature leadership is that you understand the interconnectedness of what it is you're trying to do, and you understand that you have to work with other people. And the other people you have to work with are, if you're, say you're a VP of information experience, I would expect my VP to be talking with the people in service, the people in engineering, the people in operations, the people in finance, because how is he going to know what's happening in the rest of the company except by talking to his boss? At my level, I should understand what's coming toward us and how we're being evaluated so that I can inform our own goals. One of the goals that we had, for example, in my role as operations person, we had a common process to go through salary reviews, but no one ever did it. They said they did, but they didn't do it. And so we had people who were the top ranked people in the organization being paid at the very bottom of our lists. And that meant they were getting almost no bonus, no stock. Their rewards were zero. And we had divides by, not by gender, but we had divides by geography and by culture. The people in India were being poorly treated. The people in America, if you didn't work at the headquarters site at Sunnyvale, felt like they were being mistreated. That wasn't true, by the way, but they felt that way because no one was talking to them. No one was saying, I understand your issue. No one was going and fixing problems that should have been looked at and were not, because mature leaders look at these things. And I would argue, just like Kim was saying about servant leadership, I think there's something called principled leadership, which is what I would call what you just talked about, by the way. It dovetails very nicely with what I wanted to talk about. I think the opposite of principled leadership is being a jerk. And that means it's all about me. It's about my turf. It's about how many people report to me. I don't care how well they do. Fire the bad people. We're not going to have any growth. My favorite people get to go to conferences, but nobody else who wants to. And we're going to give shitty jobs to all the people that we don't like. That's unprincipled. Principled people are honest. They're communicative. They set accountabilities and make it certain everybody knows who's accountable for what. I think that's of primary importance. So for example, if you have an organization and somebody is responsible for making certain that your editorial guidelines meet up with the brand identity guidelines that you have and your legal guidelines, and you have 3 managers with editors on each of their teams, who's responsible for that? I would just make one person, say you're the person. And I would obviously I would talk to them ahead of time. Is this something you'd want to do? But I would make certain that there's one person who is accountable so that when something blows up, I know who to call. I know whose job was going to go do this. And the same is true for how well we treat our people, how well we collaborate, who's responsible for what, understanding that, and then figuring out, where are we? What are we doing? Are we all moving to DITA? Yes or no? And if we are, what are the top 5 principles that we're going to use for that? Are we going to choose tools first and then hope it works? We probably shouldn't do that. What are the other things that we might need to do? Shouldn't we have a terminology? Shouldn't we have a common taxonomy? Shouldn't we understand how it's going to be consumed by our customers? Is it web only, or are there devices that our service people use that we need to feed into? And how do we do that? All of those kinds of things have to be brought together and put together in a package so that we all know what the top priority is, what the second priority is, and what we're going to do in every part of our business. I would call that organizational awareness and a motivational area, understanding our vision, where we want to be, understanding what we're going to do this year to get us to the vision in 3 years, and figuring out who is accountable for that. And then talk about it all the time. Here's what we're doing. Every department meeting, we said at the beginning of the year, here are our goals. Here were the initiatives we set up. We have 25 different activities we're doing. Bob's going to talk now about what we're doing in activity 1. Bob, what's our progress? And it can't be that 5 people are off doing basket weaving and hoping something's going to happen at the end of the year. That's poor leadership, because you don't know what your people are doing, or you condone them doing something that's not a priority. I think you have to be the person to say, I will help put the parameters around that so that my people can grow into the roles that they need to grow into and to do the right thing. Because once I tell them what the right thing is, and we've all agreed, it's collaborative from a leadership perspective, a corporate perspective, and from an industry perspective even. You know, if you decide in your team that your technical direction is going to be to go to, I don't know, Notepad, you probably want to validate that. You know, that good leaders are involved, and they have an organizational awareness, and they are motivated. They understand what the goalpost might look like. They might not be really good at all those things. For example, I'm not your vision person. I love to be in those discussions, but for me, it's like, what am I doing next week? It's not a 3-year discussion. But other people in orgs I've been in are really good at that. That's what they excel at. And I'm happy to let them take the lead on that. Oh, okay, we're going to go there. We're going to do this. That part of leadership and understanding all the various interconnections to what we say we should do, what we really need to do, and what everyone's expecting us to do is, to me, what leadership should look like. And the problem that I think we come up with a lot of times is that there aren't too many programs where you can go, you can go get an MBA somewhere. I don't have one. You can go be in the military. That's also a good thing for leadership. But those principles don't apply, or you need to know more about what we do in technical communication and how do you apply those to where you can be successful. And I think it's the people who are there now. I don't think you go learn that, but we as senior leaders should be teaching these things, and we should be helping people to understand what the right thing is to do. And I think it's hard to do right now. Comments?
Oh, your audio is getting a little funky. I'm not sure why right there. Right here.
How's that?
It's better.
Okay.
Tony's frozen.
Have we talked about leadership in tech comm? That's your discussion, Paul?
Yes.
Okay. Are we ready to move on to the next topic, or shall we spend a little more time on this one?
Do you have any comments?
I just wanted to, first of all, Paul, I agreed with everything you said, and you touched on so many different areas. It's hard to, know where to comment. But one of the things I just sort of wanted to tack on was everything you said about leadership and about really understanding the business and the goals flowing from the top down. How does my piece of what I have to do, why does it matter? How does this fit into the company strategy? I think those kinds of challenges for a leader are even more acute for a tech comm leader. At the beginning, in your intro, you talked about this unfortunate situation where someone went in, I need 9 people, and get the hell out of my office, kind of thing. And in the situation you described, correctly, that the team leader, she hadn't done her homework, right? She hadn't seen what was available. But oftentimes that isn't the case. Sometimes it's really a matter of, I need resources to do this work. And if it's the development team leader, they don't really have a whole lot of sympathy for that, right? They need to get product out. And if you're very lucky, the user content is seen as a part of that and is included and is, top shelf with everything else. But oftentimes it's not. And that's where the leader has to work really, really hard and establish those relationships and hear what's coming down the pike and able to prioritize, because you know what? A lot of the times you're not going to get the resources, and you, the leader, have to pick and choose. We're going to do this. Now we're not going to do that. Mm-hmm. So it's quite a bit of juggling to keep everything moving in the right direction.
I tend to agree, and it's there's no real answer to that. There's a couple of different things you can do, but you kind of have to gauge it. If you have a really great relationship with your product team, that's probably a much better opportunity than if you have a very adversarial relationship. And those things happen because of communication problems. Sometimes for me, I would rather walk into a room and say, I can't do this. I don't have enough people to do what you want, but I could do this. I could do this limited subset thing. If I had 2 more people, I could get all this done, but it wouldn't hit your date. And if I had a few more people, I could do this. But here's what I'm willing to commit to now, is a much better conversation to have in general. That's if everybody's reasonable. If everyone just escalates all the time, then you have to put on your armor and go in and, make certain you're going to do battle.
Yeah, you do. But you still go in trying to negotiate, right? And you reasonable. And then, when you get your head nailed to a coffee table, then you have to, try the next approach.
Yeah, I agree. I think also there's, I didn't mean to imply that manager I was talking about was a bad person. She's actually a wonderful person, but she was caught in an environment that didn't work. And she was reacting in an old school way that no longer was working at the company. The company was in the midst of a change, and she hadn't caught on to that. But the organization had not caught on to that either. And I had that same experience many times before we got that under control. That was tough. And we basically, we had to redesign how we responded to requests for documentation and technical communication support. And it's tough to do.
Did you have a formal process for that? Yes. In other words, submit a form or put a ticket in or something structured?
We had a process for it. We didn't have forms that supported it, although I have at other companies. But what we did do is talk it over with other people to make certain that they they also understood and could give input before you went and talked to the team. So, you know, this poor lady didn't bother to talk with any of her peers, and it turns out they did have people who were available. That's, you know, that's a miss that you can't have in public because it makes it look like you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah.
So have we lost Toni then?
We might have lost Toni. So why don't we start up with Kathryn, and why don't you tell us a little bit about what you wanted to talk about, and then we'll chime in as well.
Very good. Thank you very much. What I want to talk about is leadership through diversity. How do you include people who are not like you? Essentially, being writers, we can identify with the statement that words create our reality. And the reality is people are diverse. Not only do we come in all shapes and sizes, but we have other contributing factors such as gender, race, age, ability, ethnicity, all of these things that go into making us uniquely us. And when we are in a team with people who are not like us, how do we ensure that we can include them in the conversation? How do we make sure that we give them the opportunity to take space? How do we make sure that we hear their ideas? Because it's their ideas that are not like ours that will take us to the next level. When addressing a diverse audience, be it in a meeting or at a conference, an email to your team, or maybe an article in a technical publication, you want to acknowledge and engage everyone to whom you are addressing. Exclusive language is harmful because it can inhibit or prevent your audience from engaging or benefiting from the message you are conveying. Using inclusive language empowers your audience to become involved, ask questions, and contribute to conversations. Recently, I had a manager contact me who said that their colleague in another department had an issue when someone called in to customer service, and regardless of how many times the person on the other end of the line said, I'm a he, I'm a he, my pronoun is he, the person, the agent with whom this he was speaking, we kept referring to him as a her. You are essentially turning a blind eye to your customer by not acknowledging who they are and that they are not you. Another incident, this is a more personal incident, when my young child came out as transgender, one of my recommendations was please use the ladies' restroom rather, unless you have somebody to go with you. It's just not safe. And so he went into the ladies' restaurant room, I don't know why I keep saying restaurant, and said, and confronted the throng of people in there, and one woman said, you can't come in here. Well, he was conflicted. On the one hand, wow, somebody acknowledged my gender, and on the other hand, man, I need to use the bathroom, where can I go? That's a problem that's out there today. And what I had advised him to do was say, it's a restroom, everyone can use it. Or come and get me and I'll make sure that he can go there. And as everyone who is in my sphere knows, I'm a huge advocate, and I will stand up and speak up for those who are unable or do not have space. So again, back to my take space, make space. And I would say it's very easy for all of us to speak to a topic, but it's sometimes very hard for many of us to listen to other people's speak, especially when their voices are quieted or they haven't yet learned how to speak up. So I would say taking space and giving space is one of my managerial tricks. And how I use that is, sure, I will absolutely say, this is where we're going, this is where we're heading, this is why we're doing it, and then give space to my team to say, well, this will work for these reasons. However, have you considered these other things? Mm-hmm. And the people who are speaking up are not me. And one of the things that I encourage and ask for, and I don't always get, is dissension. And that dissension is, love you, Kathryn, but that's a crazy idea. I need that dissension. I need people to tell me from their perspective, from their worldview, from their life experiences, what this project and what this vision would mean to them, because I'm not them. And another thing that I look for diversity is being an ally and understanding my own diversity and understanding my own privilege helps me better engage with people who are very other than me. And again, I want those voices. I want to see how I can be more successful. And the way that I can be more successful is including as many different voices and perspectives and understandings as I possibly can. And my message to anyone who's leading a team is encourage diversity, to encourage thoughts that are not necessarily like yours. There's a significant number of people who do not necessarily identify with the default gender binary. A way to include them or to include anybody in the audience is to use they, them, and their pronouns. Now, I know what you're thinking. I've been using he, she for the longest time. And when you said he, she 40 years ago, wow, that was transformative. But now it's kind of old school. So using they, them, and their is a huge way to include members of your audience who do not identify as cisgender. Cisgender is being born with a gender identity that aligns with your physical biology. By using gender-neutral language, you'll not only harness the power of inclusivity, but you also become a better communicator. And as we're all communicators, I think that's something worth striving for, communicating better. So those are my hints and tips and tricks for learning about yourself, understanding your your diversity, and then bringing that diverse self to the table. When you bring yourself to the table, sometimes that means taking space and sharing your authentic truth, and sometimes that means giving space and making sure others have an opportunity to share their authentic truth. And I've learned that giving space continues the conversation, possibly even in a direction you wouldn't have ever imagined.
I really like that. I've recently been at a couple of different conferences where someone was talking about, if you know Val Swisher, for example, Val was talking about pronoun usage and about why it matters. And for those of us who are old school grammarians who, practically are Victorian in their approach, it's for me, it's hard to make a change, but I get why I would want to, especially when there's a concerted move within the industry to move to a more conversational tone so that you can reuse content in chatbots and in conversational interfaces, whether it's a spoken interface or a written one, like in a text bot or in Alexa or something. You're going to have to be more conversational, and you have to understand what issues you're going to come up against. And it seems to me like understanding that the world is moving beyond a strict binary is going to only help you, because you want to, from a business perspective, you want to distinguish your own product as being one that's at the forefront and understands those issues. That's one thing, because that will help you. But the other thing is you want to make certain you're not losing people because you can't even figure out how to address them. And those seemingly small issues add up to a bunch of things that you can be the person who's the spearhead for that. So if you're going to do that in your own organization, for example, you can also ask your brand identity people to do that in the marketing materials. And
one of the things that we've recently done here at Sony is include a other gender in our forms, because not everyone will want to select male or female.
Yeah.
Just on a form, and that form is going out to consumers. There are forms that are internal for hiring. How do you identify? And if you don't identify as a binary, please include space for those who do not identify as that binary. And that's one small thing. Recently, I gave a discussion on how to use inclusive language just in the daily workspace. And one of the things that an HR manager said is, well, I get a lot of names from people all over the world, and I don't know if that person is male or female based on that name. How do I talk to them without offending them? That's where your trusty, messy, they, them, and their come into play. Another thing that you can do is state your preference for pronouns up front. And that day, everyone who took my seminar or my in-service lunch and learn changed their signature block in their Outlook to say pronouns, and the pronouns that they prefer.
Yep.
Recently, we hired someone who, it was obvious to me, was non-binary. So when I introduced myself, I said, hi, I'm Kathryn Showers. I'm the manager of the Information Development Services team, and my pronouns are her and she and hers. And right back, I didn't even have to ask. I said, oh, they, them, and their. Like, okay, I know who you are, and I know how to. And I even say up front, I will make mistakes. And please feel free to correct me, and it's okay if you don't. I will do my best to correct myself.
Yeah.
And I've learned that language is fluid. We don't speak with the same tone of voice that once was enjoyed in the Victorian era. So why would we use the same language, and why wouldn't we change our language to include a global audience?
I think that's exactly right. Kim, do you have anything to add about that?
Yeah, I wanted to first of all to thank you, Kathryn, for bringing such a great topic to the discussion, and I was thinking as you were speaking about sort of the different ways inclusivity matters, right? So on the one hand, we want a broad perspective. We want on our teams as many viewpoints as possible. And you had mentioned, in addition, to race and gender, and you mentioned age and experience, which I thought was great. An inexperienced person can bring a great deal to a team. They are looking with fresh eyes, right? Uh-huh. And just, I'm going to say maybe it's a young person. A young person is maybe it's somebody right out of school. They bring something to the table that everyone else may not have. The other part of inclusivity is, if I am not interested in you because you're whatever, I have closed myself off, right, from maybe the exact experience I want, the exact, person I want for this task or this job, but because I've put my blinders on, it really isn't about, well, this person's transgender, so I'll get the transgender perspective, unless that's what you want. But it might be that person's just brilliant, and yes. I need that person on my team, right?
Exactly.
And one other thing I want to add about diversity is, we do come up with a laundry list of, I'm diverse. I've got one of these. I got one of these. I got to look. I got to include this type of. Well, I led a team of all women. And for me, diversity was adding men to the team.
Yeah.
And it's not really about or only about kind of those standard boxes, but it's also about who's on this team and what would add to it, what would, make the whole greater than the sum of its parts.
I'd like to add one more experience, and recently we had, we call them all hands meetings. So we had an all hands meeting, and there was a team brought up to the stage that gave a presentation, and they did a fantastic job. What they did was phenomenal. And during the question and answer section, a woman stood up and said, I noticed that your team is comprised only of men. How can women become a part of your team? And I promise you could have heard a pin drop. The conversations didn't stop there. On our internal Slack channels, our diversity WITS channel blew up. Constant this. I was so proud of this person for standing up. It was amazing. How come it's only men who ever speak on that stage? And that was a huge eye-opener because somebody stood up and spoke up. And I think that is what we as people who are embracing diversity need to, when we see something, we need to say something.
Yeah.
I think also it's
Following that,
what's that?
Following that, the site manager, the person who is the big guy here at Sony, called another all hands meeting and said, hey, I feel really vulnerable, but I'm going to tell you that I am learning everything that I can learn about diversity, about what it's like to be a woman in a man's world, what it's like to be someone who is not a man, and I'm listening to podcasts. Here's the list that I'm listening to, and I want to make a change. I don't know how to do it, but I want to listen to you so that I can learn. And having your vice or your senior vice president come out and be that vulnerable and say, change isn't going to happen because I say change needs to happen. Change is going to happen because I do something about it.
Mm-hmm. I think those are that's a very powerful statement. And I think it's also, it's representative of the things that we're starting to see all around us, right? Not only at work, but outside of work. And it's the insistence that just because I might be different from the majority of people in the room or on the team or in the organization, that my ideas somehow don't carry the same amount of weight or are not considered, or I'm certainly not the person that you want to listen to. That I think most people now would say, wow, there's a point here. Whereas I don't think we would have had the same response 20 years ago. And I think it's good. One of the ones that we touched briefly on was cultural differences and understanding and navigating what you do when you're dealing with someone who didn't grow up in the same town you did or doesn't live in the same town you do. That's I learned more about that in my jobs than I ever thought I would learn. And I thought I was pretty good at it, and it turns out I was not. Understanding why people think what they think in India versus in Israel, those you have to really couch your communication in a way that's going to work for all of those people. And that means you got to work at it. And that it's tough. I think leaders in general, it used to be you just said, here's what we're going to do. And, you're bold and decisive. We call this the old term for it. I don't know if you would be aware of it, but it's we would call that command and control, CNC. And it's a military style metaphor for leadership. And I think more and more people are saying there are some things you can be CNC-ish about, but there are a lot of things that you can't. One of them is hiring. One of them is understanding what your different cultures need and being able to weld all that stuff together and make it work in a viable organization. And the measure of that, how do you measure whether or not you've done something right? Well, you look at the census of your employees. Do I have any women on my team? Or if I have an all-female team, do I have any men on my team? Is there an age?
Or if I have only men and women, do I have any non-binary people on my team? Do I have people from other cultures on my team? Do I have people of other nationalities on my team? Do I have people of different ages on my team?
And am I excluding those people maybe inadvertently through my screening processes, through my hiring, through my own qualifications? Am I asking for stuff that's not reasonable to have, right? And a lot of people, there's a lot of discussion right now among vice presidents and presidents about how you do hiring. And one of the interesting ones at Oracle, for example, is they're going to stop requiring college degrees because college degree may not be a good indicator of success in a role. And I think the jury's out on that, but it's a really interesting way to approach stuff.
There are a lot of people who are autodidactal, people who are self-taught, who have depth and breadth of knowledge as good as or even sometimes more than a college degree.
I'm married, and let me tell you, he's something else because he knows everything. He'll tell you that too, but but it's actually true. He does.
And I think it goes beyond, types of learning and experience to types of privilege as well, right? Because it's still, requiring a college degree, also, inadvertently perhaps, but does exclude some people who weren't able to get a formal education because of generational privilege, right? Through no fault of their own, they may have been extremely diligent and worked very hard, but education is so expensive, and so it inadvertently causes some exclusion based on some other factors. It's not just about the education; it's about economic and social realities that allow people to pursue that education. So,
Agreed.
So Toni, you want to
Yeah,
roll?
I agree. Oh, I was just gonna add that in my time at ADP, I found out quite accidentally that a number of people on my staff didn't have degrees. People who were, superstars in some cases didn't have degrees, and it was because when I interviewed them, I paid no attention to that part of their resume, evidently, or I saw it and I forgot. And the truth is, once you're a few years out of college, you've forgotten most of what you learned anyway, right? All college is it really just says I proved I could do something for 2 years or 4 years, and I can learn and I can apply myself, but it really isn't the be all and end all. Unless you're a rocket scientist,
Or a surgeon.
neurosurgeon. Yeah, it might help.
Yeah,
Situation.
I do think it does depend on the role and even the discipline, right? I think one of the things about the world we live in is that, when many of us, particularly those of us of a certain age, started, we didn't set out intending to be technical communicators. And that's partly because we didn't know what that meant, but there also weren't a ton of, formal programs in it. And that brings a richness to what we do too, right? We've got, I've got people on my team who have, math majors, and we've got a lot of English majors, but being an English major, that's usually a pretty humanitarian, humanities focused degree, and you're studying, literature, and you're not necessarily picking up the technical piece, right? But we have some people who come through CS or math, or we have some people who've come from really interesting other backgrounds as well. So I think we're unique in that way. With some things, if you're going to be a data analyst, right, there are certain skills and some education might be more required, if that's even a valid construct. But so I think there's just so many paths by which people come, particularly to our line of work, but to leadership roles as well. So I apologize. I stepped away for a little bit for the. As Paul was talking, all of a sudden his words got really slow, and I assumed it was his audio, but it turns out it was my Mac getting ready to perhaps officially die. I'm not quite certain what happened, so I rounded up another, got in as quickly as I could. But if that's going to happen, this is a good way to have it happen when you've got 3 folks who can moderate and keep things going. So I apologize. I missed a little bit of the discussion. So catch me up with where we are. It sounds like we got through the TechComm piece and moved on to the diversity piece, which I'll go back and listen to. And we are kind of running up on the end. I don't see any questions in the polls yet, but let's just kind of circle back to reflect on kind of the journey we've been on through some topics. And let's do a round robin here with some parting thoughts from each of our panelists. So let's go in reverse order and start with Kathryn.
My parting thought is educate, educate, educate. And that doesn't necessarily mean going to school. It means going online and reading, going out to the community and finding those places that aren't like you and engaging in that community. The more you expose yourself to different people, different cultures, different ideas, the more you can bring back to your team an energized you who's including lots of diverse ideas.
Awesome, thanks. Paul.
I think leadership is about figuring out what kind of leader you want to be. And I think that having good principles of being honest and having integrity and of being communicative and of doing the right thing for all of your people at the right time matters. It's hard to do. It is a balancing act, and not everybody has all of those skills, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. And if you're up for the challenge, it's remarkably rewarding. And if you can, if you decide to go do that, you'll find something really, really fun to do.
All right, Kim.
Yeah, so I'm just going to piggyback on what Paul said, and I'm going to say show up. If you're interested in leadership, probably the most important thing you can do is to be present, look for opportunity, model those behaviors that you'd like to see in your team. Pitching in, coming up with ideas, helping out. Those things will serve you well, whether you have designs on being a leader or not. You really will be a leader, even if not officially, if you do those things. You'll have a good time. You'll feel challenged. You'll feel rewarded. Just show up. Just do it. You know what you need to do. You don't need a rule book.
So I'll just offer a couple closing thoughts as well. You know, I missed a little bit of the discussion, but part of what I see if I look over the whole discussion is that we really ended up talking about leadership in a lot of different ways, right? From servant leadership and thinking about what that means. You know, who are we serving? We talked about leading effort in kind of a way of blazing trails or being on the leading edge and moving things forward. We talked about some of the hard things about leadership in terms of helping to remove obstacles, but also to get clarity around purpose and metrics and unifying people about what we're trying to accomplish and needing to really have a lot of organizational awareness to do that. And then we talked about the importance of diversity to rich, high-performing teams and creativity and innovation, and the responsibility we have as leaders to make sure that we're fostering and creating that highly inclusive and diverse experience. But I just, you know, the thing I think I would like to end with is that, you know, we didn't talk explicitly about the part about leadership without authority, but it came up in all of the sections, right? Is that we did talk a lot about leaders who have roles and, you know, how you manage your team and how you set priorities and those kinds of things. But we also talked about, you know, leadership is an opportunity that everybody has, right? And I did see a common theme that, you know, it's there, right? You know, Paul told the story about, you know, at some point he threw his hat in the ring for an actual role, and his, you know, his boss said, you know, I was waiting for you to do that. And so the opportunity is there for us to create and there for us to take, and it doesn't have to be a formal role. If it is a formal role and you're looking to go into kind of team leadership and management, there are things to be aware of that are different, right? I think the key enough, especially in what Paul was saying, is that leadership is hard, right? It's not all about making connections and coaching people. It's also about understanding a bigger vantage point, right? ADP had a class to help people understand if they even wanted to be leaders, and part of what they talked about is you have to pay attention to different things when you're a leader. You have to know the business perspective. You have to know the market more. You have to understand and align with things all the way up and down, right? So I think one of the things I would say about leadership is that it works in all directions, right? You're leading, it works down in the sense that you're leading people, right? But you also have a peer group right? It might be a management team if it's a formal role, but it might also just be making connections with other groups if it's more of an informal role or leadership role on a task force or something. But it's also about, there are also relationships and alignments to manage up, right? To make sure that the effort you're leading, if you're in a corporate situation, aligns with, the business priorities as well as market conditions and all of those kinds of things that when you're that part of really expanding your influence, right? Because to me, leadership is about influence and impact. It's about inspiring people to act. It's about providing direction so that that action is meaningful. But there's all kinds of different ways to contribute to leadership. And, one of my theories about leadership is that, we tend to think about leaders and followers, and we tend to think leaders of teams. But I like to think about everybody on the team being leaders, right? So that we all have a role to play and we can all provide. Some of us might provide more of the inspirational part, and some of us might provide more of the direction. Some of us might provide more of the politicking, as it were, right? Some of us might do more to create connections. But if we all contribute our piece, I think we can really be more powerful as teams. And circling all the way back to what Kim said, we all work on a lot of teams, and those teams require leadership of a lot of variety, and even outside of work, we're all part of a lot of teams. And I think the world, if anything, is becoming more and more collaborative. So I want to take a quick look to see. It looks like we don't have any questions online. So I think we'll just go ahead and wrap up there, but I do want to let people know about a few more resources. First of all, this week we have a few other resources for you if you're interested in topics about leadership, and particularly if you're interested in how teams and leadership work in international environments. So I think one of the things we know is that everything's becoming more global, and so we have a couple bonus conversations that have been recorded. These are audio only, but and they're on this topic of how to work on international teams and how to lead international teams. So I had a conversation with Joe Panaccio, who works at Qualcomm, and then another interview with two of the folks I work with here at ServiceNow, Lisa Holtman, who's based in San Diego, and Suresh Kumar, who is based in Hyderabad. And we talked about some of the opportunities as well as some of the challenges and some tips and tricks for making international teams really effective. And then I want to call your attention if any of the materials we've been talking about this month have sparked your interest and you want to share your stories or ask some questions, or there are some prompts up on the Roundtable forum already, and you can also, I believe, start your own if there's something you want to start a conversation around. And then just also a reminder that next week we'll be posting another recorded interview, which is talking about what we can learn from sports about teamwork and leadership. And that's an interview with a colleague of mine who has a side job as a co-owner and a player on a professional, semi-professional women's tackle football team. So really interesting conversation. So I hope you'll take a look at that. And with that, I just want to say, offer another thank you to Kim and Paul and Kathryn for joining us. And I look forward to maybe seeing some comments and interactions on the forum. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all. Thank you to the panel, and thanks for everyone for joining today. I will be sending out an email with the link to the recording and the survey. So thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.